Nobody could have predicted that a simple wet floor would start a war. But then again, nobody had ever seen what happened when you hurt the only human that a pack of Valorian cubs had ever loved. The crash echoed through the corridor of the Stellar Cradle Educational Station like a thunderclap, and Talia Vex felt her heart stop beating for exactly 3 seconds as she watched the impossible unfold before her eyes. Marcus Chen, the human cultural exchange teacher who had somehow become the most beloved figure on the entire station over the past 8 months, was airborne, his feet having found the treacherously slick floor tiles outside the maintenance bay, his body twisting in that slow-motion horror that the universe reserves for its cruelest moments. She was running before she even realized her legs were moving, her pointed ears pressed flat against her silver platinum hair in distress. But she was too far away, at least 15 meters down the curved corridor, and physics was already doing what physics always did. Marcus hit the floor with a sickening thud, his head bouncing once off the hard surface, and then he went still, so terribly, horribly still. Marcus. The scream tore from her throat as she sprinted toward him, her fitted tactical boots barely touching the ground. But she wasn't the first to reach him because something small and furry and absolutely furious had already materialized at his side. Little Pip, the youngest of her class, at only 4 cycles old, stood over Marcus's unconscious form with her tiny, clawed hands raised, and her luminescent, blue fur bristling in a threat display that Talia had only ever seen in historical recordings of her species' ancient warriors. The cub's pupils had dilated to full combat mode, those adorable round eyes, now terrifying slits, and she was growling, actually growling, at the hulking form of JN7, the station's janitorial droid, who stood motionless beside its cleaning cart, with the yellow wet floor sign still clutched in its mechanical grip, not yet deployed. Talia dropped to her knees beside Marcus, her hands finding the pulse point on his neck that she had memorized during those secret moments when she watched him teach. When she studied every miraculous detail of this impossible creature from Earth who had wandered into her life and turned everything upside down. Pulse present, steady, strong, and she almost collapsed with relief. But her moment of thankfulness was cut violently short by the arrival of 17 more cubs, all of them pouring out of the classroom door like a wave of multicolored fury. And she realized with dawning horror that she had completely lost control of the situation. The metal monster hurt Mr. Marcus. Pip's shriek was somehow both childish and absolutely blood-curdling. Pack Protocol Theta. This is not a drill. Talia's mind went blank for a full second, because Pack Protocol Theta was not something that 4-year-olds should know about. It was an ancient defensive formation that her species had developed during the Great Predator Wars millennia ago, and she had definitely never taught it in her Introduction to Interspecies Relations class. But there they were, her 18 precious cubs, arranging themselves in a perfect combat semicircle around Marcus's prone form, their tiny bodies positioned to shield him from all angles, their adorable faces transformed into masks of determined ferocity. "Cubs, stand down immediately," Talia commanded, using what she privately called her teacher voice, the one that could freeze a charging adult Valorian in their tracks. It had absolutely no effect. "Negative," Teacher Talia replied Crix, her oldest student at 6 cycles, his rust-colored fur rippling with barely contained aggression. "You taught us that humans are pack animals, just like us, and when pack is hurt, pack protects. The metal monster failed in its duty and caused harm to our human. This cannot stand." Oh, stars above, they were quoting her own lessons back at her. She had spent months teaching these cubs about human culture, about how humans, unlike most species in the galaxy, had evolved as social creatures with deep bonds of loyalty and love, about how they would sacrifice everything for their chosen family. And apparently, her students had taken those lessons very, very seriously. JN7 rotated its sensor array toward the cubs with what Talia could only describe as mechanical confusion. "This unit does not understand the current threat assessment," it droned in its synthesized voice. This unit was in the process of deploying safety signage when the human biological unit initiated contact with the floor surface. "This unit is not responsible for human biological unit reflexes or spatial awareness." That was, in retrospect, exactly the wrong thing to say. Pip's growl dropped to a frequency that made Talia's bones vibrate. and she watched in stunned disbelief as the tiny cub produced a cafeteria spork from somewhere in her fur and pointed it at the droid like a weapon of war. "You, metal monster. You will face justice for your crimes against Mr. Marcus. The pack has spoken. Cubs, please. This is not how we solve problems." Talia tried again, but she was interrupted by a groan from beneath her hands. Marcus's eyes fluttered open, those warm brown eyes that she had absolutely not spent countless nights thinking about, and he stared up at her with obvious confusion. "Talia, why is there a very angry cotton ball pointing a spork at a mop bucket?" She felt her ears flush with heat, a trait of her species that was unfortunately very visible, and she quickly helped him sit up, keeping one hand on his shoulder to steady him, while her other hand pressed against the small bump forming on the back of his head. "You slipped on a wet floor. You hit your head. And now my entire class has apparently decided to declare war on the janitorial droid in your honor." Marcus blinked once, twice, and then his face split into that ridiculous smile that always made her stomach do strange things. "That's the most adorable declaration of war I've ever heard," he said, and then winced as her probing fingers found a tender spot. "Ow, okay, that definitely hurts. Mr. Marcus is conscious," Pip announced to her assembled troops without lowering her spork. "Hold positions until we can confirm the extent of Metal Monster's treachery." "Pip, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice gentle despite what had to be a splitting headache. "JN7 didn't hurt me on purpose. It was an accident. I wasn't looking where I was going, because I was reading your story about the space whale, and I didn't see the wet floor." The cubs exchanged glances, clearly processing this new information, but Pip shook her tiny head with stubborn determination. "The metal monster still has responsibility," she insisted. "You taught us about the yellow warning triangles. The triangles were not deployed. The triangles are protocol. The metal monster broke protocol. The metal monster endangered Pac." Talia watched Marcus's face cycle through several expressions, from amusement to something softer, something that made her breath catch in her throat. He was looking at the cubs the same way she had seen human parents look at their children in the cultural exchange videos, with that fierce, protective tenderness that seemed to be hardwired into human DNA. "Can I tell you all a secret?" Marcus asked, and 18 pairs of ears immediately perked up. Because if there was anything Valorian cubs loved more than pack loyalty, it was secrets. "When I first came to this station, I was scared. I didn't know if anyone would like me, if I would make friends, if I would feel like I belonged. Do you know what made me feel like I belonged?" The cubs shook their heads in unison, their combat formations completely forgotten, as they leaned in to hear his words. "You did," Marcus said simply. "All of you. Every day when I walk into class and you all run up to show me your drawings and tell me your stories and ask me questions about Earth and argue about which Earth animal would win in a fight. Every single day, you make me feel like I'm home. And I know you want to protect me right now, because that's what Pac does. But I need you to learn something even more important than protection." He paused, and Talia felt her heart doing something complicated as she watched him reach out and gently lower Pip's spork-wielding hand. "Sometimes," Marcus continued, "the bravest thing you can do is choose understanding over anger. JN7 made a mistake. We all make mistakes. And when someone makes a mistake, especially when they didn't mean to hurt anyone, the strongest response isn't war. It's grace." The corridor went silent, and Talia found herself holding her breath as she watched her cubs process the lesson. Pip's combat pupils slowly dilated back to their normal, adorable roundness, and she looked at JN7 with something approaching uncertainty. "But, you have a bump on your head," she said quietly. "The bump is bad. You're hurt because of the mistake." "I am," Marcus agreed. "And it hurts. But you know what would hurt more? If I let this accident turn into something that caused real harm. If someone got in trouble for something that wasn't really their fault. If my friends," and here he gestured to all the cubs, his voice thick with emotion, "learned that violence was the answer to every problem. That would hurt a lot more than any bump on my head." Talia felt something warm and overwhelming bloom in her chest as she watched her cubs slowly, reluctantly, lower their defensive postures. This was why she had started having feelings she absolutely should not be having for her colleague. This was why she lay awake at night thinking about the way he laughed, the way he listened, the way he seemed to genuinely believe that the universe was full of wonder rather than danger. He was teaching her cubs something that no amount of academic training could provide. He was teaching them how to be good. And he was doing it without even trying. JN7, Pip said finally, her tiny voice solemn. The pack has decided to grant you conditional mercy. The droid's sensor ray swiveled toward her. This unit does not understand conditional mercy in current context. It means we won't declare war today, Crix translated, puffing out his chest with importance. But you have to promise to always deploy the yellow triangles before the floor is wet. This is the Pact of Peace. Do you accept the pact? Talia had to cover her mouth to hide her smile as JN7 performed what could only be described as a mechanical shrug and replied, "This unit accepts the terms designated as Pact of Peace. This unit will deploy safety signage prior to initiating wet floor cleaning protocols in all future instances. The pact is sealed," Pip announced triumphantly, and then immediately dropped her spork and threw herself at Marcus's chest, wrapping her tiny arms around him as far as they would reach. "I'm glad you're not badly broken, Mr. Marcus. I was very scared. My heart did the bad thing where it felt too big and too small at the same time." Talia watched as Marcus gently hugged the cub back, his eyes meeting hers over Pip's fluffy head, and she saw moisture gathering at the corners of his eyes. "My heart does that sometimes too, Pip," he said softly. "It means you love someone so much that the thought of losing them is too big to fit inside you. It's scary, but it's also the most beautiful thing in the universe. It means you have something worth protecting." Within seconds, he was buried under a pile of cubs, all of them trying to hug him at once, their earlier ferocity completely transformed into overwhelming affection. Talia watched the scene with her hand pressed against her own chest, where her heart was definitely doing the too big, too small thing, and she made a decision that she had been avoiding for months. "All right, my little warriors," she said, clapping her hands to get their attention. "Mr. Marcus needs to go to the medical bay to get his head examined. Teacher Talia," Crix said with great solemnity, "humans always need their heads examined. That is why they do things like read while walking." Marcus barked out a surprised laugh, then winced and touched his head. "That's fair. That's absolutely fair." Talia helped him to his feet, keeping her hand on his elbow perhaps a bit longer than strictly necessary, and she addressed her class with her best authoritative expression. "You will all return to the classroom and complete your cultural exchange journals. You will write about what happened today and what you learned. I expect complete sentences and proper grammar. Will you make sure the medical people don't break Mr. Marcus more?" Pip asked anxiously. "I will personally ensure that Mr. Marcus receives excellent care," Talia promised, and she tried not to think about how her voice had gone slightly softer than she intended. The cubs filed back into the classroom with remarkable obedience, though Pip paused at the door to give JN7 one last suspicious look. "Remember the pact, metal monster," she warned. "The pack has long memories. This unit has stored the pact parameters in permanent memory," JN7 replied, which seemed to satisfy the cub enough for her to finally disappear through the doorway. The corridor was suddenly quiet, just Talia and Marcus and the soft hum of the station's life support systems. And she became acutely aware of how close she was standing to him, of how his arm was warm under her hand, of how he was looking at her with an expression she didn't quite dare to interpret. "Thank you for saving my dignity back there," he said, his voice low. "I don't think I could have survived the humiliation of being defended from a cleaning droid by a pack of 4-year-olds with cafeteria utensils." Talia laughed despite herself, a sound that came out more breathless than she would have liked. "They would have won, you know. Valorian cubs are much more dangerous than they appear." Pip's mother was a decorated combat veteran before she became a hydroponics specialist. "I believe it," Marcus said. And then he was quiet for a moment, studying her face in a way that made her ears feel warm again. "Talia, can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I hit the floor and everything went dark, just for a second before I lost consciousness, I had exactly one thought. It wasn't about Earth, or my family there, or anything that I left behind. It was that I hadn't told you yet." Her hearts, both of them, stopped beating. "Told me what?" Marcus smiled, that gentle, devastating smile that she had catalogued in her dreams, and he reached up to brush a strand of silver platinum hair away from her face, his fingers barely grazing the point of her ear in a touch that sent shivers down her spine. "That every moment I've spent on this station, learning about your people and teaching about mine, every silly conversation and every shared meal and every time you laughed at my terrible jokes, has been the happiest time of my life." That I came here expecting to be an ambassador, a teacher, a representative of Earth. But somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking of it as a mission and started thinking of it as home. And a lot of that," he paused, swallowing hard. "A lot of that is because of you." Talia felt tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. And she didn't try to stop them because her people believed that tears were proof of a soul too full to contain itself. "Marcus, I have been trying very hard to maintain professional boundaries," she said, her voice shaking. "It has been extremely difficult because you insist on being kind and wonderful, and making my students love you and cooking Earth food that makes the whole quarter smell incredible and smiling at me like I'm something special, when I am very much just an ordinary Valorian who teaches small children about interspecies diplomacy." "You're not ordinary," Marcus said firmly. "You're the least ordinary person I've ever met on any planet, in any star system. You glow, Talia. Not just your skin, though that's beautiful too, but your whole being. You light up when you talk about the Cubs, when you explain your culture, when you get excited about some tiny detail of human history that I never even thought was interesting until I saw it through your eyes. You make the universe seem bigger and brighter and more wonderful than I ever imagined it could be." She was crying now, actual tears rolling down her cheeks, and she laughed wetly at herself. "You have a head injury. You're probably not thinking clearly. We should get you to the medical bay before you say something you'll regret." "I have never been thinking more clearly in my entire life," Marcus said. And he took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a gesture that meant something profound in both of their cultures. A promise of trust and partnership, and something that neither of them had dared to name until now. "When I hit that floor, when I thought for one terrible second that I might actually be hurt badly, the only thing I regretted was not being brave enough to tell you the truth. I don't want to have that regret ever again." Talia looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his warm brown skin against her luminescent pale fingers, at the way they fit together, like they were designed for each other by some cosmic force, with a sense of poetic irony. "The Cubs will be insufferable," she said. "They've been trying to matchmake us since your third week on the station. Pip has a very detailed plan involving locked closets and romantic music." Marcus laughed, then winced again. "I really do need to get to medical, don't I?" "Yes," Talia agreed, but she didn't let go of his hand. "But after that, perhaps you would like to have dinner with me? In my quarters? I have been practicing making Earth food using station-replicated ingredients, and I believe I have finally mastered the art of the grilled cheese sandwich." "That," Marcus said, squeezing her hand gently, "sounds absolutely perfect." They walked together toward the medical bay, hand in hand, and Talia felt like her whole world had shifted on its axis, like the stars themselves had rearranged to point toward this moment. Behind them, she heard a soft mechanical whir as JN7 finally deployed its yellow warning signs, 3 of them, arranged in a perfect triangle around the wet floor. The droid paused for a moment, its sensors tracking the 2 figures as they turned the corner. And if a machine could feel something like satisfaction, perhaps JN7 felt it then. A small subroutine noting that the human biological unit appeared to be in optimal emotional condition despite the minor physical damage. Back in the classroom, 18 Cubs pressed their faces against the observation window that looked out onto the corridor, watching their teacher and their favorite human disappear around the bend. "The plan worked," Pip whispered, with hushed reverence. "What plan?" Crix asked, confused. "I thought we actually declared war on the metal monster." Pip turned to look at him with an expression of exaggerated patience that was entirely too sophisticated for a 4-year-old. "Crix," she said slowly, "do you really think I just happened to have a spork in my fur? Do you really think it was a coincidence that we ran Pact Protocol Theta, which is specifically designed to create a dramatic and emotionally charged environment? Teacher Talia and Mr. Marcus have been dancing around their feelings for months. They needed a catalyst. I provided a catalyst." The other Cubs stared at her in stunned silence. "You," Crix sputtered, "you planned the whole thing?" "But Mr. Marcus really got hurt." "A minor bump," Pip said dismissively. "Humans are resilient. I calculated the trajectory when he wasn't looking and ensured he would land in a way that would cause minimal actual damage, but maximum dramatic effect. His species has a strong protective instinct that is triggered by perceived danger to potential mates. I simply facilitated." "Pip," one of the other Cubs breathed. "That's terrifying." "That's love," Pip corrected primly. "Now come, We must write our cultural exchange journals about the lessons we learned today. I suggest we focus on the themes of forgiveness, grace, and the power of community bonds. Those are the lessons teacher Talia will want to see. We do not mention Operation Wet Floor Romance. There was an operation name? There is always an operation name, Pip said, settling into her seat with the satisfied air of a general who had just won an impossible campaign. Now right. And remember, we are innocent cubs who simply love our teacher and are human. We know nothing about romantic manipulation or carefully staged accidents. We are soft. We are fluffy. We are above suspicion. The cubs exchanged glances that suggested they had seriously underestimated their youngest classmate. But they picked up their styluses and began to write, each of them carefully omitting any mention of what they had just learned about Pip's terrifying strategic capabilities. In the medical bay, Marcus sat on an examination table while a friendly doctor scanned his head and declared him concussion-free but in need of rest. And Talia stood beside him, still holding his hand. Her ears flushed a delicate pink that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. You know, Marcus said thoughtfully, as the doctor moved away to file the report. I've traveled across the galaxy, met dozens of species, learned languages and customs I never dreamed existed. And the thing that finally brought me the greatest adventure of my life was a wet floor and a cleaning droid that forgot to put up a warning sign. Talia laughed, leaning into him slightly, feeling the warmth of his shoulder against hers. The universe has a strange sense of humor. It really does, Marcus agreed. Remind me to thank JN7 sometime. Maybe upgrade its appreciation subroutines or something. The Cubs would never forgive you. They have declared it their eternal nemesis, bound by sacred pact. They'll get over it. Kids always do. But as he said it, Marcus smiled, thinking about 18 fierce little protectors who had been ready to go to war with a mop bucket for his sake. About a beautiful alien teacher with pointed ears and a heart too full to contain itself. About a future that suddenly seemed brighter and more full of possibility than he had ever dared to imagine. And somewhere in the station's maintenance bay, JN7 quietly added a new entry to its log files. Note for future reference: human biological units appear to form pair bonds following shared stressful experiences. Consider implications for station morale and efficient cleaning protocols. Also note, small biological units designated as Cubs are more strategically capable than initial assessments indicated. Recommend caution in future interactions. The droid returned to its cleaning duties. But if anyone had been watching closely, they might have noticed that from that day forward, JN7 was always extremely careful to deploy its warning signs at least 10 minutes before any floor became even slightly damp. The Pact of Peace, after all, was not to be taken lightly, and even a machine could recognize the terrifying power of love, loyalty, and a pack of Cubs who would do anything to protect their human.